And they got about things like, we've been going for a while. Have we got much longer? Well, yeah, usually we record for about an hour. We just have a chat and we catch up. Yes.
I think that's great though. When you messaged me and you said that, I was like, you know what, I do appreciate that, like just kind of a casual, like, like hangout chat, not like a structured interview. So
I mean, as my room is anything to go by, I don't do structured. Like,
what? Yeah, let's
welcome
go.
to the podcast. Welcome to the podcast. How are you? I mean, I've already asked you how you are, but we'll go back through that. You've been having a busy week.
Yeah, it's been a very busy week. Months in the making, because Sumo Cyco's album dropped this week, and that was basically 2 years in the making. Sky started a crowdfunding campaign in, I think it was beginning of 2019 for it, and we offered, at the time, people could pre-order the album, and we offered like a photo book, vinyl, t-shirts, all that stuff. But it meant over the course of 2 years, Sky and I had to create it. And then she had to, of course, with Matt and the band, write and record the album.
Yep.
And as anyone who is familiar with Sumo Cyco, the art is never simple.
No, it never looks simple. It doesn't look like something you can just pull off in a weekend.
No. And I mean, and it's a lot of fun, and it's always fun to have people that like really push the envelope. When Sky says like, oh, can I have an album cover where I'm falling through the sky, and I want the buildings poking through the clouds and things like that. It's always I don't know, can we do that? But we'll figure it out.
It's like a small request, right? Just like casual. Just say.
It's a small request. And then not just that, but then it's like, let's have every bright color possible. And I'm sure as an artist, like color is not the easiest
definitely not
thing.
I mean, I'm colorblind, so color is never, most of my work is black and white. The only time I really use color is when I paint, and that's because I feel like I can get away with it, because I'm like, paint just mixes, it does its own thing, and I let it do its own thing, so I don't really worry about it. Everything else is black and white. But for those who are listening who don't know, I will let you introduce yourself, because I'm terrible at introducing people. So who are you, Francesca?
I'm Francesca Ludikar. I am a photographer, graphic designer, or graphic artist, and I also am getting into video. I'm a videographer as well, and creative director. So multiple hats, but all in the art world and music world.
Very much music world, like dominating the music side of things, as it were. Yeah, no, I mean, so I found you. I looked back through the emails, because you are such a busy person, of when I first reached out to you. I think it was like October 2020 or something like that. And we tried to book down and say, hey, when can you actually come chat? Do you want to chat? What would we chat about? And I found you through Sumo Cyco, which, again, for anybody listening who doesn't know, is a band. And I have seen them live twice now, I think. And I saw them live, and then I kind of got into all their visual work, and having studied film and photography, I figured I need to know who's making this, because there was a very clear style to it all. I mean, it was very clear that someone was behind it rather than the band. And I thought that was quite evident quite early on from when I saw it. And I was like, I need to find out. And then I ended up following you and following all your work. How long have you worked with them now then?
Well, Sky and I have been very good friends since we were like 15 years old.
Oh, wow.
So Sky and I go back, I'm in my 30s now, so we go back like 15, 16 years. And we always like had a creative relationship, even when we were teenagers. Because Sky was always very like DIY, very, even when she was like 14, would sew her own clothes together and things like that. And so we always did like photos, but it was always very like DIY, like figure it out.
Yeah.
And then over the years, her and I just naturally always continued to work together. And that's where, of course, I kept trying to like evolve my skill set. It wasn't what we were doing when we were 15. I was like, I have a camera. It's like, okay, let's learn lighting. Let's learn.
Of like MySpace pages and like photos from that kind of thing of people like figuring out camera gear and how to do things.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because the first thing I ever did for Sky was a MySpace layout way back. And that's what she first would hit me up for, because of course back then that was the
place
thing.
To be, right? You learned to code or you learned to do graphic design to improve your MySpace. That was
Yep. And I was one of those. I knew code, I learned how to code, and I tried to make her like these crazy layouts. So then the first thing I ever did for Sumo Cyco was a MySpace layout. But funny enough, when Sumo Cyco launched, MySpace was no longer relevant.
That's so sad. I did go on MySpace, I think like a month or so ago, to see what it actually is now. And it was unrecognizable compared to what
really? Like they've tried to change it?
Well, it's meant to be more music based now. Like they set themselves up as like a music platform to advertise your band on, kind of like basically trying to be Bandcamp or anything like that. But nobody goes there. It's just like a ghost town of.
That makes sense, because I mean, it's always bands that say like, "Oh, remember MySpace? Like my MySpace page." I rarely hear like my sister-in-law go, "Oh man, my MySpace page."
I did, I did the whole cheeky look of just like, I just need to make sure there's nothing too embarrassing left of me on MySpace thing. That's you got to do a deep dive every so often on yourself.
Yeah, it's true, because when you probably wrote some of those like posts and stuff, it was like in an angsty time, because that was like the emo time.
I mean, I vividly remember my MySpace for a while was just, I think it was just like some lady who was like covered in blood, because I was very goth at the time, like uber goth and romantic goth, and it was all very dramatic and over the top and frilly shirts and that kind of stuff. Thankfully moved on from that. Not there's anything wrong with it.
You ever do the MySpace angle where it was
definitely
camera up?
I had badly photoshopped one because I was learning Photoshop at the time, so it was like my eyes were black and like there's like some like makeup tears running down my face, staring off into the distance.
That, you know what, I do miss that trend though. I think we should bring that back.
No. I did a stream recently where I went through a bunch of my college work, which was just paintings and stuff, which I did when I was like 15 through 18. And I was like, no, I'm glad I got it out at the time, but none of this should come back.
It's all a rite of passage though, right? It's like even when I look at artwork I did 10 years ago, some people are still like, that was good. I'm like, let's not bring that up.
It's like when you stumble into DeviantArt and you see something and it's still getting likes and you're like, but this is terrible. But at the same time, the ego in me can't take it down because you're still liking it.
But and then also it's like a rite of passage. Like even if you look at like Sumo's album covers, like you look at Lost in Psycho City versus Initiation, and like they're like very, very different evolution.
That must be quite hard for you because your work's so public facing. Like if you see something and you nowadays you kind of look at it and go, okay, it's not that good. It's still out there.
It's still out there. And that's why I am so fussy with what I do now. And a lot of people will tell me I don't need to be as fussy, but I'm just like, it's out there. And musicians get it to a degree because like if they write a song, they have to perform it for ever and ever and ever. So like they want to make sure that what they write is good. And it's kind of the same thing. It's like, you know, if I always try and like have a little bit of time to sit with it, like, because I'm sure you know too, like if you've been staring at a piece for so long and your eyes like start to strain, you can sort of not trust yourself anymore.
Yeah, definitely.
if it's good. So I always am like, give me like a couple days to sit with it, just to like make sure it's good before it goes out to the world.
Yeah, I always say it's you let it stew for a couple of days. It's like making a cup of tea. You just like, okay, I've made it. I'm just gonna put it over there, and then I'm gonna walk past it 20 times a day.
Yeah.
And every time I see it, I'm just gonna be like, I don't know if I like it. But then every so often you notice something wrong with it, and then you realize you're going to just start again.
Yeah. Yeah. Tragedy, but that is one thing I have learned growing in this profession, is to allot the time to allow that.
Yeah.
And like a lot of people say, oh, I'm a procrastinator, and of course, like in my college years I was. Not anymore. I can't do that anymore.
Did you go to college to study photography then? Was that your goal? Like
I went to college for graphic design, actually.
Okay.
And I did 3 years of that. And I did like a semester in photography at the time, but I just did it because like they told me I needed to take another course. And it wasn't something that I thought I was going to get into, but the more and more I got into creative, like I've always been someone who's really good at Photoshop. And I found that I'd get a lot of photographers send me their work to retouch.
Right.
And I started realizing that I didn't really enjoy editing other people's work. I wanted to create my own work from scratch, like concepts and everything. And I wanted to be on set and not always be at a computer. So I taught myself photography after that. Like I had the fundamentals from my course in college, which taught me basically about like aperture, shutter speed, and like the fundamentals of the camera. But like lighting and editing and all that, I've taught myself.
That's cool. That's the kind of. I mean, I always say, not to besmirch you, I always say graphic design's kind of evil, but that's because I can't do it. And it's just like kind of my work isn't neat enough to be graphic. And when I meet graphic designers in the past, it's always been like, oh no, I like these bold colors and these shapes. And I'm just like, I can't do it, which means it's witchcraft, which means I definitely like.
You're right about that. Like graphic design is considered to be like vector and like clean logos and very like simple and clean.
Yeah.
And a lot of printers hate me because I'm not that type either. I'm like, no, I want textures and like grit and like all this stuff on it. And they're like, this isn't a vector file. I'm like, I don't care. You print it. I
remember this all the time. He sent me some images and they were PDFs. And I was like, why are you sending me PDFs? He's like, because that's what everybody uses. It's like, no, just like give me a PNG or like a raw file or something I can just do something with. It's like, I can't do anything with this PDF. Why is graphic design using this?
It's true. That's funny. Yeah. Yeah.
But no, teaching yourself photography is hard. So that's especially lighting.
Well, I mean, I've been lucky in a lot of ways because I have had like Sumo. I always have considered, in a lot of ways, they've been my guinea pig over years. Like Sky's always been a willing victim when I've been like, I want to try this.
Come with me.
Can I just like see? And so she'd be like, okay, cool. And like, she gets a photo out of it. And if it doesn't work, it's just like, it was an experiment. A lot of photographers and artists do use their friends. But to have friends that like are willing to kind of like do crazy, weird stuff is another thing too.
You find, like, I guess, do you find musicians respond to that though? In that it's easier for them to understand what you're kind of trying to create?
I think so. And it's interesting because like Sumo, like that's why Sky and I have always continued working together, because she likes our creative relationship, what we both do and get out of it. But like with other bands as well, like I do get a lot of bands that always keep coming back because they do feel like their photos aren't just like always them standing in a line,
I get that is the cliche photograph of just, we're going to stand in somewhere, probably maybe an industrial estate, and we're just going to stand in front of this girder and look moody.
Yes.
That's
but
all
And it's a balance too, because like press wants that photo. At the end of the day, like people want to see like a clear shot of the faces of each member, and like you know, they don't want something super creative unless you're like Rolling Stone and you want like an editorial piece around it. But like, and that's where I try and find that balance, you know, even with like Sumo and even with the band Nonpoint I've been working with, to me, it's like all about the coloring. Like Nonpoint, we just did a photo and they're standing in a line and it's black background, but I have made all their colors black, gray, and red. Okay. So like everything still feels very like branded and a part of it. So it's like, for them, they feel that creative, like, oh, this belongs with our album packaging and our art, and this feels like us, and they're happy with that. And press is like, great, we got the photo we want there.
It's simple. It's straight to the point.
Yeah.
Every photographer looks at it and goes, yeah, but we could have done something. We can explore this a little bit more. I think this is one of the reasons I kind of wanted to reach out to you, because you do see so many bands and you see so many musicians, and especially using visuals, but you never get like your name never gets thrown on the album cover. And I always find that same with like kind of film and TV and all those kinds of things. You see the actors and the actors get all the attention and the praise and all, and you're like, yeah, but who made this? Like I need to know more about that person and know why they do this and what they're all about.
Yeah, I mean, and that is the factor of like being a behind the scenes person. It's like part of the life, right? But Sumo is always very good at like giving me shout out and credit. Nonpoint is the same as well. And they always try and make sure that they give credit where credit is due. And so I always feel lucky and I appreciate that. But I mean, that is the industry and that is the world, right? Like it's the musicians and the artists and the actors.
I mean, I guess it kind of plays to that whole idea of whenever you get directors, it's like, yeah, well, directors all secretly want to be actors, and you know, photographers all secretly want to be in the bands they're photographing.
I mean, and there is some factor to that, because like a lot of music photographers, some of the biggest music photographers were musicians first. Yeah. And you know, for me, like I enjoy, of course, like, you know, I appreciate when I am recognized for what I've accomplished. Like when people say to me like, oh, that album cover was really good, I'm like I do really, that means a lot to me. Yeah. And that does feel very important to me. But you know, I'm not someone that I consider like to be a real entertainer, so I don't necessarily feel I have to be in the limelight.
I'm just secretly working on your side project band, which will just come out of nowhere. The solo album you've not told anybody about.
I should do like a spoof project where I like create a band and I'm just like I'll do press photos of myself, and it's just there's never any music release. It's just like it's got all the promo content, the great website, like all that stuff, but then there's just no music whatsoever.
I feel like someone did that. Like I feel like there was a musician, or I feel like it was like a death metal musician or someone who basically managed to make like an online campaign about themselves, but then turned up to gigs and everyone realized that there was no band. It was just this guy.
Yes. That was a thing like 2 years ago. There was a guy who booked all these shows and had promoters promoting it, and the band like didn't exist.
Just I don't know. There's a part of me as an artist, I feel like you have to troll the audience back, kind of, and I feel like that's the ultimate level of what you could do. Just create something completely non-existent, but with all the press. You know, music videos for songs which don't exist, right?
I think especially for people like me like that, because you know so much of the inner workings, you can totally pull it off.
You could easily pull off. If you just started, you know, posing someone and produce the thing, you could get hype for a band which no one's ever heard the sound of. That's how important
it's like
branding
sold
is.
out everywhere.
That's the crazy thing of that. I feel like this is what people forget when they listen to bands and music, and you learn about them and learn about what they do. You forget you are being sold something, but it's created by someone, and not necessarily the band you're listening to is creating that. Branding becomes almost more important.
the music industry is like that. I definitely try to not be like that with artists that I work with. You know, I really always want to make sure that they feel like what they're representing or how they're being represented is them.
Yeah.
And not being told how to look or how to be. You know, and even it's been interesting, like this past 2 weeks with Nonpoint. For anyone who doesn't know Nonpoint, they're a band based out of the US. Sumo's toured with them twice. Sumo Cyco's toured with them twice. And they're a legacy band. They've been around for like 20 years.
Right.
That's
they quite had a legacy.
They had like they've had quite a few good big songs, and they had one called In the Air Tonight. They did a cover of Phil Collins, and it was like in the Miami Vice movie. So they've definitely like had their structure, and they've got a hardcore fan base, and you know, they've been on major labels for 20 years, and they just left and went independent. And that's what one of the announcements we made 2 weeks ago was they went independent, and then they've put me in charge of their creative. And that was a large part because they wanted to see what I would do for them on their upcoming releases, and see if they really did take things into their own hands, and not put it as much into a label and other people, what it would do for them in their future releases. So, you know, I definitely try and help artists with that, and make them feel like that they can take charge. And as you know, with Sumo Cyco, they're like that as well. You know, they've really got their hands in every part of their band.
I think that's important, though. I sometimes I think I don't know how comfortable people are within music and within having a band or being a performer and letting someone else control any aspect of that. Like that's got to be a huge change to make, especially if you do get signed and then the label's like, yeah, we're going to do this with you. That's a scary thing. Just, I mean, I can't imagine doing that as like someone taking hold of me and being like, yeah, you're going to make this kind of thing now.
I agree. I mean, I think I think you're very right. Like it is a scary thing, but I understand like both sides of it. Like if you are an artist, it's like at the end of the day, you want to like create art, write music, and like not worry about like, is this song available in Australia?
Yeah.
I get that having all those things and spinning all those plates is a lot. But I also think on the other side of it, no one's going to work harder for you than you. So definitely. if you can strike that balance of like in between, I think that's right. And like Sumo Cyco does that, and Nonpoint does that, where they've associated, they are taking things in their own hands, but they do have the people around them to guide them on things that might be a little out of their wheelhouse a little bit.
Yeah. It's like, it's almost, I mean, it's a bad analogy. It's almost like having an accountant of just knowing that I'm bad with numbers and going, I need someone else who can do the numbers. Like I can make things come in, but you just handle this bit.
But I've been learning that with creative too, right? There's things that like I know how to do really well myself, but like the more adventurous I try and get on certain creative projects, I'm like, you know what? Having someone who can like literally mathematically map out how this is supposed to like hang on the set, or like, you know, that is kind of out of my strength. So you lean on someone who does know how to do that better, right?
I mean, how do you find that then? Because you mentioned that you're quite not perfectionist, but particular about the way you do things, or the way something should be done. Like working with other people is a nightmare in itself. Then if it's not quite going the right way,
you know, as a photographer and a graphic artist for all this time, I've really done it all myself. It's actually been this past like 6 to 8 months that more people have been trying to help me and get involved in it, and a lot of it has actually to do with the pandemic. With Nonpoint, they're in the US, and so they still wanted me to be a part of their creative and in charge of their photo shoots. And I was like, okay, but I can't be there in person. Like the border is closed.
Yeah. I can't physically leave where I am.
It's not that I don't want to be, I just actually can't.
Yeah.
But they still wanted to do it. So I had to lean on other people to source all the gear. I gave them a list. I told them the concept, and I literally drew out lighting diagrams being like, if this is the subject, this is where the light has to be.
Yeah.
This is the kind of light you're going to need. And then they had a master list of all the gear. They sourced it. And then like through Zoom, they would be at the location and they'd be like, okay, this is a location we're thinking of getting. Does this work? They'd like show me all around it. And then on the shoot day, I was on Zoom the whole time. They had like a special feed in to me and I could see into the camera as the photos were being taken. So then with the microphone too, they could hear me so I could give direction to the guys and all that. And then they mailed me the hard drive with all the raw images to edit it. So
that's crazy.
After going through that experience, I was like, okay, maybe I can work with other people.
Maybe, just maybe. I mean, I always get like, I mean, I know obviously pandemic's the elephant in the room in terms of industry and creating and all these kinds of things, but I think it's given creatives such a view of what is possible nowadays. Like I think a lot of us kind of get into that position of creating in the same way over and over again, and it gets to a point where there's no real challenge because you know how to do it. You know, the challenge is finding clients, finding the concept or whatever you want to find. And then to have someone suddenly go, oh, actually, no, if you can never leave your house again, could you still do this? And your brain goes, oh, I don't like that. I don't like that you've just suddenly done this. It's forced people to evolve.
That basically did happen. And I went through everyone went through a chaotic 2020, so I can't say I went through a chaotic 2020, but that was a big part of it. Was like, okay, all of those projects that we had lined up, can you still do it? And I'm like, well, I physically can't be there. And then they're like, well, we have to at some point move on, so you have to problem solve around this. And it's like, well, I don't want to lose the client, like especially like music industry wise, like you network, you don't want to like lose clients that you've gotten their trust. So I'm just like, okay. And we problem solved around it and it worked. It did work. Would I ever say it's a solution? I don't know. I miss being in the room.
But it's there. It's an option, right? Like it is an option. Yeah. If it goes absolutely tits up again, you can get it done, right?
It's true. And I mean, that is the thing I learned. And I did learn, like, okay, with this team of people, if they were willing to like so much, they wanted me involved. They could have gone with another photographer in the US.
Yeah.
And I gave them that option, but they really did want to keep working with me. That it told me that loyalty as well. And the willingness to like source the gear and not just say, oh, screw that, told me the perseverance on their end as well. Yeah. So I was like, okay, that's a good team of people to be with, because it does really mean that like whatever the odds, they're going to work with you through it.
Yeah. I think that especially with a client relationship, that's really important. You don't want someone who's kind of a bit too hands off or just like, oh, it's going to cost how much? I guess I'll find someone who's cheaper and move on from that kind of end point of just trying to get things done for the lowest cost at whatever they want done. Having been a photographer freelance for a short while following uni, that was a nightmare. Like getting into the professional side of it, I can't imagine going back to that. Like I got out of photography because of clients, essentially.
Oh, really?
Well, so I studied contemporary lens media, which is just a fancy way of saying photography and film. So I was into photography and short film, and I was going to go off and do all of that, and then I realized that I don't care about the technical side of photography in any way, shape, or form. It seemed like a barrier to me just being able to create whatever I wanted to create. And then working with clients and having shot weddings for people, my enthusiasm just dipped. I was like, no.
Well, there's that's all very good points, because there are so many aspects of photography in that way. And I always think there are two kinds of photographers. There's the technical photographer, and then there's the creative photographer.
Mm-hmm.
And the technical photographer is the one that's like always up on the latest gear, knows every in and out of like what that camera can do.
Yeah.
And is always studying like, oh, like Sony has come out with this sensor, and this sensor means like this and this is possible. And of course, this is really impressive. You do need those people. But then there's the creative people that like, there's the creative photographers that see a vision, right? And they that they just want to kind of see that vision come to life. It's not really necessarily about the kind of camera or things like that. Of course, the knowing that stuff helps you bring your vision to life.
Mm-hmm.
But also, if you do have people on your team, like I always look at big photographers like Annie Leibovitz. She is definitely a creative photographer, and she definitely knows like cameras and understands them, but she has a whole team that's gonna like always make sure that like that she's working with the top cameras. It's all synced right, like everything is set up for her to like be ready to go and shoot how she's envisioning, right? So there's those different things, and that's why when I say there's tech photographers and there's creative photographers, they do need to work together too sometimes. Having technical people around creative people is really important.
But I think that shows in your work, though. I think like with you having done graphic design, it shows that you've got that technical knowledge which you can apply to creativity, and it works well, and that's why your images are so good and impactful. Is having that balance which you've managed to strike, which I think many photographers just don't. You either some of them you go one way or another. You end up super technical, but there's no concept and there's no feeling to an image, or those who go full creative but are never able to produce images because it just falls to the waste. I'm curious now, though, because you mentioned a little bit of photographers which you do kind of look to for inspiration.
Yeah, I mean, Annie Leibovitz has always been my top one. Annie Leibovitz was the one that got me into photography. My sister-in-law had a book on like Vanity Fair's top portraits of the century, and she like one night like 10 years ago, I was eating dinner at her house and she put it on the table. I was like, I think you'd like this because you like art. And I when I was flipping through the books, it wasn't just Annie Leibovitz photos. There were like 50 photographers in that book. Annie Leibovitz's ones were, sorry, I'm getting text. Annie Leibovitz's ones were the ones that I could immediately tell which ones were hers. Yeah. I'd flip through and I'd be like, that's an Annie Leibovitz. I can just tell, like style, lighting, the way she just sees things. And it dawned on me because I was like so blown away by it. I was like, she gets paid to do this.
You can get paid.
I mean, it's not easy to get paid to do that, but
but you can get paid for it.
But you can get paid.
Yeah.
It's possible. It exists. And immediately at that moment, it was like, okay, I want to try. I want to try and go down that road. So of course, she was the one that like started me on the photography journey. But since then, I've studied like so many different aspects of photography too. Like there's some music photographers that I absolutely love, who are phenomenal at like just capturing energy live. Just Josiah Van Dien, he is Shawn Mendes' photographer, and he's incredible. Then there's like Ashley Osborne. She is one a little bit like me. She's a creative director and does like shoots and stuff like that for bands, but then she also does like goes on tour and does concerts as well. So
yeah,
there's definitely I try and I'm always peering around and going, what's everyone else doing?
Though I think people worry about that. People worry about looking at other people's work because they're worried that it'll influence their own work, or they feel like maybe someone will look at me, oh, well, you're clearly just imitating this person. I'm like, well, no, You take inspiration as an artist, you know.
You take inspiration, and I also think because there's always the artist turmoil of like, oh, but I really like to have this person did that. I wish, and I have realized that I don't think a certain way in some things. So like there's photographers that I can really admire, and I can look at their work and I can go, okay, they really did, like Stephen Klein, like he's amazing, but like he thinks in a way I would never think. Right. So even though I can really appreciate it, I will never imitate him because I just don't think that way. And I've realized that you can be inspired and take note, but you also have to acknowledge how you creatively work as well.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yeah. It is again, I think it's that balance of looking at what's around you, but also remaining, unique to yourself. Like you say, it's you think in a way that no one else will think. That's just a reality of being human, I guess. That's the overly deep. But we got way below surface level of just art. Yeah,
that happens with me.
I mean, it's every podcast ends up in gradual existential crisis. That's just how we live. But yeah, it's figuring out what you do, how you do it, why you do it, and I find it interesting, kind of your view of it coming from kind of like a DIY. I want to make this image. I have an idea. We're going to try and do that idea, and then looking at other people and thinking, well, how did they do that? Because that's a kind of a cool thing. But knowing that eventually you're just going to come up with an idea and be like, oh, well, maybe we could utilize this to bring this idea to life.
Yeah.
Roll within that whole creative process.
Yeah, I mean, I've learned with myself that I do like color.
Evidently, I mean, if anyone looks at you, it's obvious that you like color.
I mean, you look at Sumo Cyco, and I mean, that is Sky, because I've always felt like when you look at Sky on stage, she always has had bright color hair, always picks bright outfits. That's always been her. So her and I've always complimented in that way because I am not afraid of color. But even like when I'm working with Nonpoint, who doesn't have the bright color hair and the bright outfits on stage, I still need that like pop of red in there, like that little bit of like something striking with color. And I realized that that's kind of like more my thing. So
yeah, I wouldn't call Sumo like a beige band or a gray band in any way, shape, or form.
I always think they look like they're like a psychedelic circus act, but like in a cool way. Yeah,
it's kind of like if clowns started a punk band but then embraced just the color side of it. Just like we started off as this thing, but now we're cool and colorful, and metal and colorful, and that's how we go into it. It's interesting here because, like, as I say, like I thoroughly avoid color as every aspect of what I do, even in the podcast. I mean, this gets.
But that's your thing.
That's laziness, though, mine. Because when I started, I didn't want to color grade everything. So I was just like, well, if I just turn everything black and white, I don't have to color grade it.
No, but I mean, and there is something always to be said about that. And you, especially if you are someone who shoots like more candidly, like less in studio portrait, because like in studio and portrait, you can literally control like everything about the environment. You can control what the person is wearing. You can control where they're standing, how the lighting is, like everything. If you're shooting more candid out in the world, then it's definitely, in my opinion, a lot better to go to black and white because of the fact that you can't control the environment, but you still see something about a picture that is still striking, and you're trying to take away what's like distracting it. If there's like something bright in the background that doesn't work at all, but the photo is still good, you want to like still, it's a way to resolve it, right?
I love photographing really colorful things, but in black and white film, and then just handing people the photographs and just knowing that I know exactly what's going on here, but you guys can't see any of this. I've hidden it from you. I've made that choice. Like, you don't deserve the colors in this photo, which I saw. There's a reason I don't go out. Don't photograph people.
Photographing people too, like I've learned, like, there's so many different ways, and this is me going down into the photography rabbit hole, but like there is when so many aspects of different kinds of photography. Like I've learned how much I respect like adventure and nature photographers for what they do, because the way they go through to get a photo is so completely different than like how I would with people. Like they'll go live in the wilderness for 30 days so that the animals get so used to them being around that they start acting naturally around them. And then once that happens, then they start bringing the camera out. And I was like, that is a lot of like patience and work for a photo. And I highly respect it, but it is a very different way of doing things,
But then I think the same kind of goes for what you do with like live performance and capturing essentially emotion or very like intimate portraits of people on stage. There's a level of kind of confidence and knowledge which goes into that, which I can't understand. And I know nature photographers will understand. It's like, cool, you're going to stand in front of like a huge crowd and get in the face of the artist whilst they're doing their thing. It's like looking down a cannon, just like if it goes wrong.
It's true. It's funny because like I never realized that was something that I naturally did, that like didn't spook me until I worked with other bands, and I wouldn't be able to do a gig and they'd pick another photographer and they'd be like, oh, it's so hard to get other people to run across the stage. Yeah. They're too nervous. Yeah. I didn't realize. I was like, what do you mean? You want a shot of the drummer? You just go walk up to the drummer and take a photo. Like,
and I'm just like, no, I'd stand off to the side with like a really long lens so I don't have to be anywhere near that guy. Like there's so much. I vividly remember weddings where I've just been like, do I have to go down the aisle and photograph these people?
But it's funny because like now that you say that, like I think of like Download Festival when Sumo Cyco did that in 2019. They played to a crowd of thousands. Like that was the biggest crowd Sumo Cyco has played to thus far. And I don't even remember the crowd. Like I think I was just like so locked in that I was like, this moment is important. Like, just get in there.
Just absolutely. I mean, that's kind of crazy though. Like in terms of your live stuff, that you're so on focused, so on point that the rest of it just doesn't matter. Like I don't even like. I'm aware of the crowd because I try and get photos of the crowd, but I don't think they see me for some reason. Like I'm not aware of it. Could be the band on stage.
But it's funny because like I will get tagged in posts like on Instagram and stuff being like, caught Frankie on the side. I'm like, what are you looking at me for?
But I feel like that's the thing though. Like if you've ever done photography or photographers, you look for the photographer. Like when it's like kind of like when you've done editing, when you watch a film, you're like, oh, I see what they did there. And then when you go to gigs, you're like, where's the photographer in this? I know there's one around here somewhere.
It's funny because I'm sure but like with stages, the I guess the policy or the united understanding is like crew always wears all black on stage, right, so that you don't see them. But Nonpoint had me always wear a red hat. Elias really wanted me to wear a red hat, and it was because he felt when there's a pit of photographers and there's people always on the stage, if I had a red hat, he'd always know which one was me. And then he'd know which camera to really put attention to because, of course, it's his content. Yep. So that became a thing, and people started recognizing the red hat. So it became an Instagram thing of like spot the Frankie. Whenever I was on tour with Nonpoint, people would look for the red hat on the sides of the stages and they'd take photos and it would just have hashtag spot the Frankie.
Like having all I can think of is those little trolleys you get in supermarkets with the flag, so you don't lose your kid. It's like, where's my photographer?
It's very effective, though. Yeah. It is because Elias will spot me on the second balcony, like 5th row, and he's done it where he's been like, all right. And because he of course has the microphone. He's like, I want everyone to go look at the second balcony and looking for a photo right now. And I would be like, oh my God, in those moments I realize everyone's looking at me.
Yeah. It's suddenly very, remember, oh yeah, there's a crowd.
Yeah. Then I get shy. I'm like, oh, hi, okay.
Yeah, as photographers, you get used to hiding behind the camera. So as soon as someone points to you, it's like,
yeah.
Comfortable. I mean, obviously, pandemic-wise, we mentioned kind of back and forth in emails. That's obviously thrown live performance like out the window, so to speak. Yeah. I mean, I'm assuming you're missing that tour life, that everything to do with
absolutely. You know, it's funny because like I'm freelance, so I live two lives. I have the road life, and then I have my home life. And my road life has always been something that I like to balance out my home life. It's always been that, okay, I want like a month or two of just like social, working with people every day, taking photos every single day, and just like that kind of craziness, but that life. And then when I come home, it's just like, you know, I don't mind if I don't see anyone for weeks. And I just want to like, you know, bury myself like in editing and just, you know, I'm good with that. And this past year and a half, it's been all home life. So I really do miss the road life. And I miss the adrenaline of it. There is very much an adrenaline to touring and concerts and being around people and everyone. Like, the thing I love about concerts is, and this is the thing with music, of course, is just that no matter like what is going on with people's lives, like they're having, you know, like a hard time with their family, or like, you know, they're having issues with their job or whatever, like they go to a concert and they forget about it all for a couple hours. They have a good time. Like everyone's in a good mood usually at a concert. And to see that, like, you know, everyone's been going through a lot and they haven't had that release, that I feel I miss the most. But I also think that when the first concerts are back, everyone, and I mean, we're starting to see it, like people are having footage, I think, of like in Israel, and people are like losing their minds.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because it's kind of like, it's like a cleansing, which people do. You go to a gig and it's just, you know, you forget your troubles. You throw yourself into whatever you're watching. You're entirely focused on what's on stage, and the world around you doesn't exist. So when you take that away, returning to that, that kind of thing which stopped, like I'm thinking like we're not entirely out of lockdown in the UK yet, but I kind of said they're like, I might give it a couple of months before I go to a gig, because there's some people who really need to get out and just, I don't know if I want to be around for that.
It's so true. But oh man, you know, I don't know when my first show will be, being here in Toronto in Canada. Toronto is going through one of the we're in our third wave, and we're in pretty bad lockdowns at the moment. Our third wave is our worst wave out of the other two. And so we are technically not supposed to leave our houses except for exercise and essentials. But you know, we're moving forward with vaccines, and they're hoping like by the fall here, that things will be like opening up and back. And I have told myself that I'm kind of like, you know what, when things are like given the green light and go, like there's a time that's like, I just want to go find like a show. If it's a bar show with like 25 people.
I do feel like those people who maybe were like booking like one or two people in a crowd are suddenly going to have a much larger crowd than they expect.
I think so. Like, I won't even care if I don't know the band, don't know the music. I'm just gonna be like, I want to be there.
Could be a fake band, which we've never written music for.
Yeah, right. That's how I get the crowd. And I'm just like, okay. But it's interesting because like Nonpoint has some shows booked already for September. There some of the festivals in the US that got moved forward have moved forward to that time. So we'll see how it goes, but I'm kind of like hopeful. I'm like, as they're my touring family, it would be nice to be able to get the content of like just them going back out
everything
for the first time.
Everything just re-emerging from the caves of, I mean, I don't know why I said caves. You know, I've been to Toronto. It's like the most metropolitan place I've been in. No, yeah, I think especially like, I mean, I've seen quite a few virtual shows during the whole last few years. It's only been a year.
It is technically a few.
As we come out of it, I've been to virtual shows, and at like virtual shows, I kind of like, and I kind of want them to keep going, but mainly because like there are bands who I like who don't tour the UK, and I feel like they give you that opportunity.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm like, yeah, you know, it'd be nice to get back out there and have that environment.
The industry is saying that like the live streaming model that definitely was created during this time is definitely, they feel is going to be a stay. And it's not going to be a stay in the sense of what bands were doing at this time, in the sense of what you're talking about, that if there's a band that you really love and you want to see their performance, but they never come to the UK, then they have a show in New York, you can buy tickets to see it virtually. And yeah, they're saying that is definitely going to be something that they're going to introduce into the concert model. So
concert music model of
getting
music model. I think it's quite strange with the whole kind of virtual live performance, because pre-pandemic, to me, a virtual live performance was always associated with some sort of gimmick. It would always be like, oh, it's the first one on like Second Life, or the first show anyone's ever done online, or we've got 360 visuals and you can come see this.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even need that. I just need like a camera at the back of a crowd so I can see what's going on in the other side of the world. And I'd pay $10 to see that. Why not? You know?
I think the thing, having done the live streaming models the last year with bands, like the hardest thing for a band is always if they don't have a crowd, the energy is hard on the musician to like, because they feed off crowds, right? But if you did have a live streaming model where there is a crowd, and that artist is then able to get that energy and interact, and you feel the energy in that room, I definitely do think that is something that is worth $10 to see, you know?
At least. I mean, have you seen how they've done wrestling shows? I saw some footage from like a wrestling show which they'd done, and they had like the same arena with the ring and everything, but they have walls of faces.
Oh yeah.
Because it's all people's like live streams of them on Zoom. And it's like, oh, I mean, one, that's terrifying because you're just surrounded by screens. It's like living in Black Mirror. But you're just like, that seems kind of crazy. But yeah, you get the same vibe of like people just screaming and shouting and being there to feed the performance, as it were.
I know. I think I saw them do that with baseball in the US, where they had I don't know if it was screens or they like paid for people that could buy a seat, and that they put like a cardboard cutout of them in the seat.
That's just dangerous though, because I wouldn't want to put cut out of me. I'd want to cut out of just like some random.
But people did that. It was so funny. I saw one where someone bought a seat, but they put a cardboard cutout of Vinnie Paul in it.
Yeah. So I just like, so what did you do? I bought a cardboard cutout. So what did you put in? And it was like a bear or like a giraffe in the stands, just to throw people off. Really wanted to block the view of the cardboard cutout behind me, so I made it huge.
You know what I think is going to be so funny is like 20, 30 years from now, when like we'll see something like in a movie or like in history or like some news thing, and they'll be like, what is up with that baseball game? And we'll be like, that was 2020.
Got to be there.
Yeah.
I am dreading that moment of this. It's just kind of like anything dramatic happens of just, this being, even when things return to some level of normality, of this just still being the focal point of conversations of friends because you haven't seen those friends in 2 years. Yeah. And then you get to see them. It's like, oh yeah, so we're doing this. And how did you handle lockdown? Like, I just don't want to talk about it anymore.
Yeah. It gets exhausting. There's a skit you should see by Julie Noki on YouTube, and she like had a social distance picnic with one of her friends, and she went, "What's new?" And then she's like, "What's new? What's new?"
Who knows what's new?
It's like the conversation just stopped right there.
It does. Like, I think that's kind of been the benefit for artists, though. I mean, I know from speaking to other artist friends and whatnot, like we said at kind of the beginning of this, it challenged all of us to change how we work, and it challenged us to work in a way which we'd never even considered. But it meant that we always had something to talk about. Like, it was always like, I'm trying something new. You know, I've got a camera set up on Zoom, and we're going to do this. So I've started painting again, and I never painted before. And it gave us a little outlet to like get into friends and family's lives.
It did, and I think that's a very positive thing. And I think, you know, I learned how to cook.
Oh, really?
I was not great at cooking. It terrified me before, and I was like, you know what? Yeah, it's not that hard.
No, it's not that. It's you stand in front of huge crowds and photograph things in the high pressure, but cooking scares you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not normal, but
none of us are normal, really. Like,
that was my Achilles heel, but I don't have that weakness anymore. I learned how to cook, and that was one of the things where I was really proud of myself, because I was like, you know what? I am home. I'm not on tour where I have to like have makeshift catering and like all these kind of things, eat soggy sandwiches or anything. So like, I'm going to learn how to do this. I'm going to learn how to like do it properly. I'm home. So if I don't ever learn it now, I never will.
Yeah. If there was a time to take up a new skill, it was during the time where we couldn't leave our own houses. is definitely a way to kind of look at it and look at the future, I guess.
Yeah, but I also think the interesting thing is the innovation that's had to come in this time. I think like people are nervous, like, oh, music industry, like what kind of state is it going to be in? Like, yes, it took a hell of a beating. But for the bands and for the industry teams and all that stuff who did innovate in this time, I think they're going to come out like out of the gate stronger and better than they are before, because they're mentally equipped. Yeah. And from that reason, I do think like it's going to bounce back really quickly. So
definitely. I think, I think I completely agree. I think there's a level of, and it sounds kind of cynical and harsh on others, but it's a case of, if you have survived this period, even if it's just been ticking along, just keeping creating things, if you've managed that, going back, you're way stronger than you were previous. And there's people who have not managed it, and it's like, well, you know, it's sad that you stopped, but at the same time, maybe that's just, you needed a change. You need to change what you were doing. If you can't survive doing this, then you need to alter what you're doing and adapt and overcome.
I think that's the thing. It like exposed a lot of demons for certain people, right? Like how they handled this, and like there's no judgment whatsoever, because it's like such a weird life world we're in. But it really does tell and expose that, where it's like, okay, maybe you do need help on this if you are really, you know, struggling, and don't be afraid of asking for help. Or, you know, if you did, like, I'm a creative person, so that's what I leaned on and I went towards. And I think that it really does tell you a lot about certain people, right? Even look at like Sumo Cyco, Sky and Matt, like when the pandemic hit, like they didn't know how this was going to affect their album release. And it's still, looking at it, I'm like, you've had your best album release to date. So, you know, it didn't stop you. And I think that's the positive thing. I think as much as a hurdle as this can be for people, you just, it can still have its rewards. You just gotta work around it.
Yeah. You gotta figure it out. I think that's a great point to round this out on. I think that's a positive message for the future of creatives, is you do have to just work around it.
Work around it. I mean, Yeah, it does. And for me, like the biggest reward, I really cannot wait until when concerts are back. I just think the photos, like everyone bawling, crying in the crowd, just being like music, and just like the artists are crying because they're back. Just a lot of tears. And I'm like, those photos are going to be great.
Yeah, that first gig's going to make and break some lives in many ways, I think. But it's fine. We're going through a cultural cleansing of everything which we have done.
Yeah.
And we've adapted and overcome. To round this out, though, you mentioned the album a couple of times. Where can people find the album if you want to?
They can find it. I'll plug first. If you go to sumocyco.com, that way directly supports the band. You can find it on vinyl. We just sold out of the book. But there's a CD
people
as
even
well.
Going now. You can't get the book. What's the point?
The vinyl's cool.
There's no pictures in vinyl.
There's one. Great photo. There's that, and then also napalmrecords.com. They have an exclusive vinyl with a different colorway, which is really cool. And then if you're not into physical, then you can go on all streaming platforms, Spotify, Apple Music. They've definitely got it. So
and obviously check out Nonpoint as well, because they're doing amazing
things.
things.
Nonpoint just put out a song called Ruthless, which is very ruthless. And I'm working on the music video for that at the moment, and that will be dropping probably in a couple days. I don't know when this comes out, but if not, go check it out on their YouTube. And yeah, that's exciting. That song's also available on all streaming platforms, and you can pre-order the EP on nonpointstore.com.
Almost like that's rehearsed in some way. Almost like you have that information just to your brain. You're just like, I'm going to have to say this hundreds of times. Either way, links will be in all descriptions.
When you spend like 4 days putting together merch bundles, you kind of learn where it is.
Learn where everything is and how everything works. Yeah. Adds to the skill set of being able to repeat the press release.
Yeah, exactly.
But thank you for joining me, Francesca. It's been
thank you for having me. This was a treat, very fun. So I enjoyed it.
It's been great. Obviously, check out Francesca's work because it's fantastic. It's how I found to drag her onto the podcast to speak for an hour. But we will talk to these guys later then. Bye.